So the workshop is rather small, and it doesn't take terribly long to walk through. So I'll just do a quick fly through, shall we say, and then we can sit down and talk about the machines and the work and the place and all those details, kind of the backstory.
So tell me a little bit about your background and then some of the projects as an engineer that you work on in this shop.
So as my background, my formal education, I have degrees in mechanical engineering and physics. I went to a liberal arts college, which is a little unusual for people in my line of work. And I have worked on some of the largest engineering projects ever undertaken, such as the Boeing 787. I spent 8 years structures there doing design analysis, and some of the smallest on my own in my own workshop.
So tell me about like a recent project. What kind of software do you use? What kind of?
I do manual and I do finite element analysis, and that can be detail analysis, such as a part that attaches a seat to a seat track in a 787 in a Boeing airplane, which I spent a long time working on, or it can be larger, less detailed things such as structures. So it could be building structure, mezzanine in a factory, or it could be a very fancy table to support your surface plate, such as the one I have over in the corner of my workshop here. So I found over my experience with engineering and large companies and small that there is perhaps an artificial separation between roles. And it makes sense from an organizational standpoint, but I don't believe, at least not for me, that it makes sense from a practical standpoint. And so, say at Boeing, they had designers and they had analysts. And they had very separate roles, but neither one could really do their job without understanding what the other was doing. And it's the same, I believe, on a slightly broader scale, whereas an engineer, a mechanical engineer, needs to be able to understand what it takes to actually make the parts, the machines that they design. What does a tolerance mean? And being hands-on and doing all of the things, both from the highly technical and the instrumentation and the testing to the making parts and putting it together and figuring out why it doesn't work, is, I believe, it's useful, it's satisfying, and it produces better quality results.
I heard that you at one point had a lathe in your kitchen. Speaking of not having room for things.
I needed a place to put the small lathe. And the kitchen seemed like a good option. We did move it down to the cellar, which was an adventure, but it did keep the chips and things out of the place.
Okay, so speaking of moving machines, so let's talk a little bit about why you decided to, how you found this area, why you decided to come down here, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges of setting up a machine shop here.
The end of the earth.
I.e., tell me a little bit about the history of this workshop. How did you come down here? Why here?
So, as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm an American. But I also have an Italian passport. That means we can live and work pretty much anywhere we want in Europe. And we were in Norway, and for various reasons, we decided to look south. And so I got out the weather maps and the property prices and the topo maps and the global warming predictions, and sort of picked out an area as like good climate, good water supply, moderate prices, these sorts of things. Turns out to be a little hard to get to, but anyway. So we came down for a tour and drove around on the craziest roads you have ever seen, and stumbled into this little village and decided, like, it's kind of nice. I don't think I was thinking about machine shops at that time. But anyway, one thing leads to another. We end up buying a house here. And then we end up buying another house with marginally better access than the other house, but not amazing, as you will probably see.
So tell us about getting the machines. So the machines were in Norway. So walk us through that.
I had to find companies that could actually negotiate the paperwork to bring machines into the EU, transport them down to France, and then find a way to get them up to our village. Eventually, through some nice recommendations, I found a great Danish company that brought the stuff from Oslo and to about 20 kilometers from our village. And so it took us a great deal of effort, a lot of French on my wife's part, some random connections with American-loving French truck drivers and masons with amazing forklift skills to eventually negotiate three different people that we could get our machines transported from nearby village to the center of this village, and then up this tiny road and into my workshop without dropping anything or breaking anything or getting rained on.
Somebody was watching this who really had this dream of moving to rural France and setting up a precision machine workshop in the foothills of the Pyrenees. What might be some advice you would give them?
No.
No, come on.
No.
No,
just don't.
Where is your machine shop located?
It is in a very far, remote corner of France. Pretty near Spain and near the Mediterranean.
Is it in the mountains or is it in the foothills? Or
we're at about 600 meters in the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains.
And the most important question is, how's the wine down here?
The wine's tolerable. We can make do. Well, let's have a little sample.
So while you're opening that, tell me a little about the history of this workshop, starting with the first machine you purchased in here.
Let's see. So the first, I have been building up my workshop in Europe since about 2014, I believe. And the first machine I bought was a Schaubling 102 plane turning lathe, which I got in the Netherlands and shipped to Norway, and have then eventually shipped back down to France. Cheers. And even though I have purchased a couple other lathes in the meantime, I kept this one because it's just a very nice machine for certain activities.
What was the machine in this workshop that you've had to do the most work on?
That would be the surface grinder. It's a East German Mikromat or WMW 1960s vintage machine, which had some significant wear. It had a lot of use, and so I bought it in Germany, had it shipped down here, and then I rescraped the two horizontal sets of ways, which turns out to be kind of a challenge because it's a surface grinder, so the potential for accuracy is high, and therefore when one can get there, you kind of try, and it's not an easy thing to do.
What were some of the things you had to take into consideration when building this workshop in this specific environment and specific context?
The building is on a hillside, so the back half of it is against the grade or under grade, below grade, and therefore there is a potential for water to flow through that soil and rock, which is not something you want to have in your workshop full of nice old Swiss machines. And so in addition to the basically freestanding building within the old building, I put gravel and perforated tube under the floor to a drain that goes out to the front side, to the low side, so that any water that comes into the space between the walls will drain out, and we have no risk of flood or humidity.
And what were some of the other considerations that you or what were some of the other choices that you made? Because this was your opportunity to design your dream workshop from the ground up.
Well, we made some compromises and spent a lot of time and space and money on insulation and new walls and air conditioning and these sorts of things to create an environment that is comfortable, constant temperature, low humidity, quiet, a lot of light. Put in 9 LED tubes, which makes for a very bright, even there's really no shadow, just bright light everywhere, which is a really nice thing. I've seen and been in so many workshops that are so dark, and with modern lighting it's just not necessary. It's cheap and cool, and yeah, just put in lights. Lots and lots and lots of lights.
So lights and having the crane.
The crane is my pride and joy. When you work in a workshop mostly by yourself and you need to move anything more than 20, 30 kilos, if you don't want to kill yourself or break your back or break the machine, the crane is a really nice thing to have. And so I built a overhead gantry crane, travel crane, designed for about 500 kilos, which is 1,100 pounds. So I can't lift the full Sheldon 135, but I can lift the bed, or I can lift the headstock or the table off the grinder, and that makes it possible to change mill tables or do all sorts of things that otherwise would not be safe or possible, or definitely not advisable. I took my Sheldon 13 apart once without a crane, and I do not want to do that again.
So we've heard about a couple of your machines. What are some of the other ones that you have in here?
So we have the 135, the Sheldon 135 to this side, and it's my big lathe, as I call it. It's much larger than the 102. Typically leave it set up with a chuck. It can use collets. I have collets for it and various other work holding. But I found it very convenient to rough a part out on the 135 and then turn around and finish using collets or a 6-jaw face chuck on the 102, which is it's a really nice combination to have. Changing chucks to collets and whatnot is kind of a pain, and there's just some work that is nicer to do on the 102 with the very fine control, and it's just easier for the scale of work that I end up doing. Usually, it's a good match. Technically, I could do the same thing on the 135, but it's nice to have the 102, and they're not that expensive, so it's not a huge compromise.
And so I see you have a milling machine.
I also have a Sheldon 13 milling machine. It's the later variant. I've acquired a slotting head, a high-speed head, and a conventional ISO 30 head. It's in pretty darn good shape. It cuts very accurately and very straight when I do my part. Yeah, nice machine. It is to some degree a study of compromise, because the envelope is relatively small given the weight and cost and whatnot on the machine, but it results in a very sturdy, very accurate, very nice, very pleasant to use machine with good controls. Most of the machines and equipment I brought down from Norway, but the surface grinder and also the surface plate were purchased in Germany and then brought down here to France. And I had a small surface plate, but I wanted a a good size. This one's 1 meter by 600 millimeters, and basically new from Johan Fischer. The point of the surface plate, it is the most accurate thing in your workshop. And so if you can't measure it, you need to buy it from someone you can trust. And so there are a few companies around Europe which produce very, very good quality plates. They're extremely flat. They are going to do what they say they're going to do.
And then what about this saw that you've been working on?
Yes. I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. So I needed a cut-off saw for a long time. I had a small bandsaw and it was terrible. Just awful for a variety of reasons. I had no desire to go there again. large bandsaws are great. I don't have space for such a thing. And so I found a power hacksaw in the Netherlands. I think it's perhaps a Dutch company, maybe Italian, we're not really sure. It's relatively modern as power hacksaws go because it was built with ball bearings. And it's got dovetail ways and these sorts of things, cooling system. So I bought it in the Netherlands, shipped it down to France, and I re-scraped the way so the blade will move very straight. Replaced bearings, cleaned, painted, replaced other parts. It still needs some more work. It needs a vise that actually holds the parts. But it shows promise, and it's been an interesting project. So I also have a drill press, a bench model, shall we say, but it weighs about 90 kilos, which is why it is under the crane, because I cannot lift it. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. It's Arboga, I don't know. I apologize to the Swedes and anybody else who understands. But it is a very sturdy, useful machine because sometimes you don't need super precision. You just need to punch holes in something or run a tapping head. It's useful for that. So a friend of mine found that in Stockholm. I think I drove it back to Oslo and then shipped it down here. That's what it does.
I don't actually know what the 404 is.
There's a Deckel SOE D-bit grinder, small tool grinder, which is quite a useful tool to have in the workshop, particularly when you're in a remote area where you can't just order stuff up quickly and have it show up. I use it for making D-bits at design, but also for small part grinding, for making special cutters, grinding lathe bits, sharpening scraper blades for machine rebuilding.
And I see a CNC machine over there.
Yeah, so I also have a small CNC router that I purchased a parts kit from a guy in Germany. It's the Carla is usually how it's called. It's a small, very heavily built router, which I've been using mostly for casting patterns for some projects I've been working on. It is capable of cutting metal, obviously, as well, but I haven't really explored that too much. A little bit of engraving, which actually worked pretty well. It would be, of course, nice to have a big 1.5 meter table mill, but it will not fit in here, so it is what I am working with.
And you have a 3D printer.
I do have a 3D printer. I've worked with 3D printers for quite a long time now. I've had a few different ones and designed and built and a number from scratch, and know more about them than I really have any need to most of the time. But they have their shortcomings, but they definitely can be useful for certain applications. I've tried to use them for casting patterns and found that I think the router is a better tool for such things.
So what kinds of castings what are you working on where you need to make casting patterns?
So I have been working on a bench vise of my own design for quite a long time now. We're on to the third iteration of casting patterns and many more designs than that. It is definitely the most expensive vase ever made in terms of my time invested. Hopefully I can sell a few of them at some point, but basically I wanted a new vise that had some modern features such as changeable jaws, and there's nothing available, not from Switzerland, not from Germany, definitely not from China. And so I set out to make the tool that I would like to have, and I think a few other people will have. This is not a vise for everyone, but it's a vise for people who, have a workshop full of Shaolin machines and want an appropriate accompaniment for that.
And what about this straight edge?
Most straight edges are for scraping, for machine rebuilding, are of a very sort of conventional design. And as an engineer, I looked at the design and it's not very efficient. It makes sense if you have to make the pattern by hand, because I have made some short, about 33 centimeter straight edges, and they worked, and the quality of the iron is very good and stable, and it scrapes well. So I have high hopes for the bigger the bigger sibling of that design.
So where is the foundry? Is it in France?
So we're situated about 30 kilometers, 20 miles from the border between France and Spain. It goes along the peak of the Pyrenees Mountains. It takes a while to get there because the roads are anything but straight. But anyway, so we're quite close to Spain. And it turns out the closest foundry, iron foundry, is in Manresa, which is on the Spanish side of the border.
So what are these stones all about?
So, as the internet is well aware, if you flat grind abrasive stones on a surface grinder, you can use them to clean up metal parts such as precision levels or vice jaws or these sorts of things that will get little dings, and that raises a bit, and that can throw off your measurements or your clamp up or whatever it is that you're doing. And so since I rebuilt the surface grinder, I decided I would grind some stones, some abrasive stones. And for the abrasive stones, I've been grinding conventional synthetic, but also I found there's a local Pyrenees stone that is used for sharpening knives and various cutting instruments. And so I decided to flat grind those as well as the synthetic.
Let's see. Do you have a favorite machine?
How can you ask out of a favorite? It's indecent. I mean, you can offend somebody.
You say it's like asking if you have a favorite child.
I mean, it's worse because you probably do have a favorite child.
Yes.